What is the healing process and what does it actually look like? I think there's so many times in society when we think that healing is going to be this blissful, easy, consistently upward moving experience that is just going to get better and better and better the more that we do it. And the truth is, it's a lot of work because of all the emotions that come up and that have to be processed through the body. It can be absolutely exhausting when you're crying or when you're having anxiety at 2 in the morning or when something pops up in your head and you just get upset and angry all of a sudden for no reason. Well, not no reason, but there are triggers that happen. And even though we don't always have words for what we are feeling, those are moments when we get to decide how we are going to respond and whether we're going to give ourselves a minute to actually heal. So, when we are feeling those feelings of um, unworthiness or dissatisfaction, or maybe we're experiencing just untold grief that maybe hasn't been processed yet, those are moments when we have to give ourselves space and time to feel those things. And so part of the experience is giving yourself space to feel. And that's not always an easy or pleasant experience, particularly when we're expecting to feel good. We're expecting it to be a pretty process. We're expecting to not have screaming or being in physical pain or being on pins and needles, because part of the processing or the healing process sometimes involves experiencing different types of physical pain. And sometimes that could even be karma, depending on how that is, like experiencing things from the other person's perspective. Usually that doesn't happen, but it depends on what your own personal learning experiences are, what you came to experience in this life. So, most of the time, when people are hearing healing, there's going to be unusual sensations. And that could look like feeling hot or cold, feeling time distortions or the perception of time distortions, like going back in time to when things happened, or going forwards in time and kind of feeling you're in the future or your future self. Sometimes that could feel like electrical shocks or feeling things that are moving up and down in your spine, particularly when you're falling asleep or you're trying to relax. Usually, the moment when healing happens the most often is when we are at a peaceful moment. Because think about it, all the trauma that you had happened in chaotic moments when you had no time to process. And the body keeps the score. So when you have a moment of peace, when you have a moment all to yourself, that's going to be the moment when your body says, okay, well, now we're going to let you experience that weird sensation we didn't get a chance to earlier because you were blocking it, or because you weren't ready, or because XYZ. The subconscious mind is there to protect you. It is there to shield you from the things that you are not ready to look at, to experience, to feel, to think about. And so when we have experiences of disassociation, which is completely blacking out from your experience, and that can happen without alcohol, it can happen during the healing process, it can happen as part of even the traumatization process where you have gaps in your memory because your subconscious took over and decided, okay, we're not going to even memorize that right now. We're just going to block it out. And the reason that there are times when people cannot take any more trauma is the moment when they cannot take in any more of those disassociated experiences. So there starts to be not only gaps in their memory, but a feeling or a flooding of anxiety because some of those things are coming up again. Once again, everyone's experience is different. Sometimes these sensations happen for different reasons, but realize they can be debilitating to the point where if someone starts their healing process and really gets into all of these sensations that are there for them, it really might mean that going to work the next day is not really going to be possible. There's going to be a lot of inability to do things that were once normal because the life that you've naturally chosen as a result of that trauma is not really for you, does not really support your healing, does not really support where you want to go or who you want to be in life. And so sometimes those things end up falling away. Realize healing is not for the weak. It is not a trivial experience. Depending on how much CPTSD, PTSD you have experienced, it could be a very sensational reacquisition of your own spirit and reacquiring of your own intuition, your own happiness, your own inspiration and joy. Reclaiming all of that can be quite the experience in and of itself. Healing is not necessarily easy. And particularly when you are experiencing all of these different sensations, sometimes why people experience psychotic episodes. I say this because I don't necessarily believe in psychosis. It is a part of the psyche for those that have been pushed to a point where their spirit broke. And so because the world of science does not enjoy a void, it has labeled all of these things. But psychosis is not necessarily what we think it is. And it is part of the healing process for some, depending on their genetics, their personal dispositions, their own level of trauma, or how resilient or not resilient their spirit is. They might experience some of those thinning of the veils to the point of having some of these hallucinations, or maybe just being so in your own personal mind, your own inner world, that the outer world is irrelevant. It becomes, consensus reality becomes unimportant or uninteresting or maybe just impossible to deal with for various reasons. And it could be because there's still the presence of that traumatic experience. And sometimes it's because there's such a deep internal revisitation of the internal lessons that need to be learned. Not lessons in the sense like you did something wrong, but something like realizations, maybe is a better term, of, well, this is the situation I was in. Where's the power? Where's my own agency in that? And so that's why we're revisiting. So psychosis in and of itself may not necessarily be a bad thing. It might be part of their own healing process. And sometimes you need mania in order to get through a really rough section of your life. You need to have too much energy in order to do something with that and to move your life forward in an intentional way. Sometimes it's necessary to feel depression because we haven't been moving our bodies enough. And there's a deep sadness that comes with that because part of being human is to be physical, and not moving the body, not getting enough sunshine, not changing your diet so that it reflects the fullness of what the earth actually has to offer instead of all these processed foods that really will mess up your brain chemistry. Prioritizing your own health is prioritizing the health of the planet. And so there does come a great depression with not following your dreams, or not knowing or investigating, being aware of what is your purpose, or if you have one. Sometimes the purpose is just to breathe and enjoy life. Who knows? Some people have more of a purpose than that. But know that regardless of how you feel about your own existence, or no matter what society tells you, realize that the native experience of your life is that you have fulfilled your purpose if you are breathing, if you are existing, if you are enjoying yourself, if you are following your own happiness, your own inspiration, you are defining and enjoying divine will. That is your purpose. Anything beyond that, you're going to find that you're going to have certain interests or focus that becomes your purpose, etc. And it's not necessarily something that is this mystical, high, intense calling that we all have to fulfill. We don't all have to be superstars in that sense. But sometimes being within your purpose, living within your purpose, so that depression is not a thing. The reason why depression is there is because we are not following our dreams. We're not physically moving. We're not creating serotonin, dopamine because we are moving our bodies. It's all related. When you are intensely interested in your purpose, like ADHD people, for example, they're always following their joy, as it were, because they're hyper focused on whatever it is that they're focusing on. It may not be a pleasant thing, admittedly. Sometimes the anxiety spiral is there because that is a brain pattern that has to be rewritten. And in the process of rewriting your brain pathways, of when I think this, when I get triggered here, I end up in an anxiety spiral. In order to get rid of those negative brain patternings, you have to unwire in order to rewire. And so that's sometimes where the memory gaps come in, is because the brain has to literally disintegrate certain brain pathways. Like the highway is under construction. You cannot pass this particular location. So short-term memory might not be there. It's easy to lose keys really easy, wallets, ID, etc. And it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with you other than your environment is so calm that your brain decided it's a good time to gut the system and put in pathways where peace is hardwired in to your nervous system and your brain pathways. It's kind of a good thing. It doesn't feel like it at the time, but that is one of the things that can happen in the process of healing. Don't be scared of it. And so realize that in order to rewire your brain, you have to unwire it first. And sometimes that's where these different types of like memory gaps come from, or the disassociation from your body. Realize it is normal to be able to feel the temperature of your skin. It's normal to feel that you are sitting on something. It is normal to feel the wind on your skin. It is normal to feel when someone says something and it makes you feel anxious in your stomach. That is normal. What is not normal is to feel none of those things in your body. The process of resensitization of your body as a mechanism that is meant to feel and process emotion is a process that does not make sense to the conscious mind. That means you have to create pathways, you have to create sensations. So that's sometimes where the electrical shocks or like the shaking happens. If you research what kriyas are, you will find that the definition of this Hindu word is involuntary shaking of the body. And usually it happens in different types of breath work or meditation, maybe even different yoga experiences, Kundalini awakening type yoga. But basically, a kriya is when the body is shaking or there's involuntary movement. It could be like even graceful movements. One could even say it could be stemming. I would tend to argue that, but it could be like shaking of your hands, or even like beating your chest or gripping your body in different places. But usually it's trembling or shaking that is involuntary. And that is part of the brain attempting to rewire itself in a very tangible way. Even though it's an involuntary movement, it doesn't mean that you can't stop the process at any moment. Most of the time, it's going to be something that you could stop shaking if you wanted to, but that's just what your body wants to do in that particular moment. It wants to move in certain ways, and it's best to let it do that. Even though you don't necessarily feel like you're controlling your body as much, your body needs to do those movements in order to fully let that emotion or that energy go in a very embodied sort of way. Ultimately, even if you feel an emotion, like let's say you're sobbing or at some point, you're still going to need to fully physically embody that later. You're going to need to go on a walk to replenish your body and put energy back in when you just let go of a bunch of sadness or grief. You're going to need to put something back in your full body movement along with that emotional experience. So just letting your body do the kriya, which is to do the shaking or whatever it is, allowing it to do that is really much better than stopping the process. Even if you end up in some weird yoga pose, that's another thing that can happen. Sometimes, like the more, the nicer levels are when you end up in a yoga pose involuntarily. That's got to be the craziest experience. I've only heard of it happening once, but sometimes that can happen, is ending up in a yoga pose, or having been disassociated, wake up in a yoga pose. That can also be a thing. And it depends. Sometimes people doing different types of plant medicines might experience that on a conscious level. They might experience the shaking and all these things. That's part of the natural body's process of healing. So don't be afraid of it. So give yourself grace during this time. It's going to be a strange, sensational experience. It can be something that the people around you do not understand. They don't necessarily know how to handle you or how to be good company. But it is something that you can make easier on yourself. Don't be hard on yourself for short-term memory loss, or kind of getting really internalized in your own personal world, leaving consensus reality for a while. These things happen. It's part of your psyche healing itself. And it's not something that's well discussed in general psychology, because general psychology does not necessarily help you get there. Complaining about your existence, your life, your history for an hour is now beginning to be clinically proven to hardwire the brain, or to reinforce the negative pathways in the brain. So therapy, traditional talk therapy, does not necessarily address the issue of healing. And only getting with your senses is going to be what takes you to that place of deep healing, understanding, and essentially rewiring of your brain pathways. So the best thing that you can do during this time is to make your life situation as easy as possible. You're going to need a certain level of stress, because the brain is going to want to put a stress load on your system in order to maintain the current negativity pathways that it has. So you're going to be sort of seeking a certain level of chaos in order to maintain that. It's self-created this time though, so that's very different from something being imposed on you. But if you are in the space where you are beginning to heal, you're beginning to embrace peace, and your brain is beginning to rewire itself, there's that short-term memory loss, etc. The best thing that you can do, if at all possible, and not everyone can do this, is to either have a lighter workload, not take on as much responsibility at work, maybe even go down to part-time or get a part-time job. Change your work schedule so that it is the most stress reduction that you possibly can have in your life in that space. In addition, have a support system. If you have people around you that you know are going to support you during this rather confusing time, capitalize on that. Rely on them if you can. Make sure that they are treating you as if everything is fine and normal. Let them be utterly peaceful and in their own zone, do what they would normally do, regardless of whether you're tweaking out or super anxious or any of these things, or maybe you're just like in a different reality. Make sure that they stay within consensus reality, that they're sort of negating any types of cataclysmic thinking that you might be having, or paranoid streams of ideas. Because the more that your friends or family support whatever perhaps delusions you got going on, it's not actually going to be terribly helpful. It's better for them to say, nope, this is what's really going on. For the rest of the world, you might be in your own zone, and it's not necessarily that these things aren't true for you personally, it's just that no one else can experience them. And so here's what consensus reality has to say about that. That's the most helpful that they can be. But being afraid of whatever it is that you're going through or experiencing is not helpful. So those types of people just need to be not in your life. If they're not going to intentionally regulate their own system while they're around you, they are not helpful. lastly, just embrace the weird, embrace the process of whatever is going on for you, as in, don't judge it. Don't necessarily give it any credence either. Have a healthy amount of skepticism about what is maybe passing through your mind, because realize that these emotions and these thoughts are passing through your experience. They're not necessarily the truth, but it does mean that a part of you is experiencing those things as if they are happening. And that whole process is happening for some kind of a reason. It is giving you some kind of an experience that is part of your healing process. So it's just something to be aware of, something to watch, and something to observe. The whole process is something that needs to be observed, not taken as fact, not necessarily taken as the end all be all of where you should be in the world or in life, but it is an experience that is passing through your awareness or your experience of life. And that's okay. There are going to be other experiences, other days beyond this particular moment. Even though you might be having a panic attack, or maybe you're feeling super paranoid about something, or maybe everything in your reality is converging on this one immediate truth that feels like so important, realize that it's an emotional, maybe time perception, an aspect of reality that is passing through your experience. And until you're on the other side of that, you will not know why that was part of your healing until you were all the way through it. So enjoy and relax into the process as much as possible. Don't get attached to anything that is within your experience. Take everything with a grain of salt and let your brain rewire itself to a configuration that gives you the highest happiness, peace, calm, magic, tranquility that you possibly can. And reach out for help if you ever need it. I am a somatic therapy life coach. I do specialize in PTSD, CPTSD, or find some other life coach out there that you feel is going to help you and assist you through your process, because nobody should have to go through that sort of intensity alone. You always have help, you always have assistance, and you are divinely supported, loved, protected at all times. This is One Life Mechanics, and I will see you next time. Please subscribe and comment.